Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome back to the Alignment, the webinar series all about global products. Today, we're launching our 10th episode, the centennial episode, I guess, which is why is my product performing better in some markets than in others? If that is a question that you struggle with, today we're going to have the answer for you. And we've got some extremely talented and interesting people on this call to help answer this question for us in just a second. And I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. If you are joining us for the first time, we are Global App Testing. We are a services business. Our job is to help enterprise software organizations understand their global products through a mix of functional, user, and localization testing with real people and devices around the world. So whether you want confidence that your payments work in Brazil with real money, or you just want to ask users in India what the experience is like there, we can help. If you have joined us before, and this is not your first time, then I want to recommend our new podcast. That's very exciting. I'm actually turning 30 next week, which is very exciting for me. And I thought, what does a man in technology in his 30s need? And the answer was right in front of me. It was a podcast. It's going to be covering very similar material to the Alignment. It's a little bit more of a product focus, but we've got 3 fantastic episodes so far. You can see there peeking out Lucas, who I think he's just left last week, actually, but he's working in Google, right in the heart of their data and analytics team. We've got Mauricio there, who's the chief product officer at Wish, that underwent a kind of restructuring after the pandemic, after an unsustainable growth period. So really interesting stuff. And if you subscribe right now, then because it's very new, we could potentially double the subscribers, which is a very exciting prospect to me, and will please our manager very much. So please do subscribe, have a look, check it out, and rate us 5 stars if you like the product. The podcast. We've got a fantastic webinar lined up today. Our panelists include Ini Adizian. Ini is Senior Product Manager at eBay, presently responsible for the buyer payments experience. Ini is going to be suggesting a framework for factors which might be contributing to a difference in performance between your different markets. Alba Simon is a Senior Product Manager at Adidas. Alba is going to be looking at the role of ecosystem design thinking rather than pure user centrism when you come to examine these differences. We've got Jena up next. Jena is Product Manager at Procore. Procore, if you're not familiar, make it easier to manage your construction. They're a B2B business, and he is going to be talking about how flexibility can help you bridge those gaps between performance in different markets. My colleague James is going to be looking a little bit at how to test to help you understand the differences in your different markets in terms of performance. And finally, I have a couple of questions for David about how you can use the operational side of things in TMS to overcome those differences. So we've got a huge webinar today and lots of interesting stuff to get through. The way that this is going to work is that everybody is going to talk for 5 minutes on the subjects I just indicated. But we need your help because we need to ask them questions throughout in order to prompt a lively and exciting panel discussion afterwards. It's going to start in about 25 minutes from now. So in order to do that, you need to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You can do that. You can see it says Q&A and there's 2 chat boxes overlaid over each other. If you just type in your question there, it is very, very likely we'll get to it. So please do pile on in, ask some questions. Anyway, I feel like I have been speaking for 100 years, so I am going to hand over to our very first panelist. Ini is going to be telling us all about how, is going to be exploring a framework for diagnosing product performance across different markets. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to you, Ini.
Thanks for the intro, Adam. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. My name is Ini, and I currently work as a Senior Product Manager at eBay, where I do own the shopping cart experience across all country sites on our native Android, iOS, mobile web, and desktop web platforms. For those of you who may not be familiar, eBay is an e-commerce platform that currently services 132 million buyers in over 190 countries and derives 50% of its revenue from its international operations. So it's definitely a global business with a lot of scale. However, today my thoughts are mine and I will not be representing the brand. As PMs, we do work a lot with frameworks. And so I thought it would be fitting to use a diagnostic framework to help us identify why our products might be performing better in one market versus in another. This framework includes external factors, which are those that are beyond our control because our products do not exist in a vacuum. It also includes internal factors which we can control. So the first slide here details some of the external factors that we need to consider when developing, scaling, and launching our products in new markets. The first thing that I'd like us to consider is the nuanced regulatory environment in which our products exist. Have we considered things like the laws governing data privacy, taxes, AI? For example, we can contrast building tech products in the EU versus in the US. The EU typically has more stringent laws, such as GDPR and the Digital Markets Act, which aim to prohibit any tech practices that impinge on its citizens' rights. Also, they also aim to prohibit anti-competitive tech practices. Another example that we can consider are the laws that are governing AI. AI is all the rave right now, and the EU has recently approved its first ever comprehensive AI law, which is set to go into effect in May. This law bans AI applications that impinge on its citizens' rights. And so when thinking about scaling or launching products, AI products in the EU, we cannot ignore this law. Another factor that I have listed here is competition. So we need to ensure that our products are designed in a way that is defensible in the market that we are targeting. We live in a tech-driven age, and what that means is that there's a lot of innovation, and with a lot of innovation comes a lot of substitutes. Many products are competing for users' attention, and so designing our products in a way that is defensible in the target market would be so essential. I have also listed things here like political stability and socioeconomic factors. I won't dive deeper into these because of time, but these are definitely factors that we want to consider, especially when thinking about targeting developing economies. So now we'll move over to the internal factors that we need to assess. Thanks, Adam. Assuming the product is fulfilling a job to be done, which means it is solving a functional need in a market, we can then begin to consider things like, what is the target market that the product was built for? Let's use an example of consumer finance apps like PayPal and Venmo. When PayPal and Venmo were built, they were not built to scale to a critical segment of the market, which were Black millennials, the underbanked, and the unbankable population. This is because those segment of users saw the existing banking systems as intimidating. Cash App, on the other hand, was able to target this segment of users. And by becoming so deeply immersed in culture and community of that segment, it became able to target those segment of users. It was also able to address the needs of a larger population because it had addressed the needs of this niche population. The second internal factor I've listed here is localization. And when I say localization, I mean, has the product been truly localized? And this does not mean giving one market the experience that another market has, and then just translating the language to, say, for example, Chinese, giving the Chinese market the American experience and then translating the language. But this means really understanding the sensitivities of that market. Let's look at payment products, for example. Just because in the US, Apple Pay is widely accepted as a form of payment and users in the US market use that to transact, doesn't mean that our users in the Chinese market want to use Apple Pay. Alipay, WeChat Pay, and even sometimes cash is more preferred in that region. So giving users in China an American experience that has not been localized to the Chinese market will be doing our products a disservice. There are other factors here as well, like infrastructure, such as data centers that are required for the product, ensuring that the product is compliant, and also ensuring that we're distributing our products through relevant channels. So, for example, the dominant mobile operating system in the EU is Android, which has 65% of the market share there, versus in the US, iOS has 60% of the market share here. So we need to ensure that we are giving users the products and meeting them where our global customers are. You might then ask, what can I do to successfully launch and scale in markets? And so a few things I think that are essential to consider are: one, relevant and contextual market and user research. This begins with identifying the right type of research. So should we be using surveys versus prototype testing versus running pilots in the markets to gain understanding of the market landscape? Research will help us understand the cultural context and nuances, the relevance of our product in that market, as well as the potential laws that might govern the use of our products in the market. The second thing here is to lead with empathy. And as product leaders, this means that, and product and localization leaders, this means that we need to immerse ourselves in the context of our users. We need to use the lens of our users to dogfood our products and understand what they might feel when they are using our products. And finally, we need to embrace diversity. This means building diverse teams to encourage diverse perspectives, but also to avoid implicit and proximity bias. In conclusion, to identify why a product might be performing better in one market versus in another, we do need to consider external factors such as the regulatory environment and the competition. We do need to consider internal factors such as target market segment that the product was built for, true localization of the product, and then finally, through conducting relevant and contextual research, leading with empathy, and embracing diversity, we can build truly global products. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you so much. That's super useful. And yeah, great to hear a framework of all the different reasons your product might be performing differently. I'm going to hand over to Alba now, who is going to be talking a little bit about something called ecosystem design and how it could affect that performance. Over to you, Alba.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alba. I'm a global senior product manager at Adidas, where I help consumers find the right product, the right sportswear product for them online. Today, I'd like to share some tips to answer that question of why is my product performing better in some markets than in others, and a little story of my experience about how my team at Adidas has embraced ecosystem design. Just to caveat, my thoughts are my own, and I won't be representing the brand today. So, a couple of years ago, my team kicked off work in an exciting new opportunity space, outfit shopping. We immediately got to work. We went through our discovery process. We set up a few A/B tests. We ran a pilot in some markets. And while figuring out our global rollout plans, we realized our solution was not going to perform the same in every market. So we came to the realization that we needed to build not only to be user-centered, but with the whole ecosystem of our product in mind if we wanted to succeed. So to give you a little bit more context, our consumer problem was that consumers struggled to find outfit inspiration on our channels. When buying a tracksuit, they didn't know how to style it. When buying a top, they weren't really sure what bottoms to match it with. So we dove into our data, we did our user and competitor research, and we identified who our consumer was, what their pains were, and how we could solve them. Our consumers were primarily women who wanted to feel good when they did sports, and they wanted to see relatable content of how they could style their sports outfits. So we started designing an outfit shopping experience that would help consumers be inspired with a variety of outfits and would guide them to find the right outfit for their occasion. We did some pilots in UK and we got some really promising initial results. This fueled our enthusiasm. So we got ready for a global rollout. And as we turned our attention to the markets in the East, we started to realize important differences in web design, in user behavior patterns, and mental models of these consumers. So I'm going to be honest and say that we panicked a little bit, questioning whether our design solution would fit the local needs. So back we went to user testing and research, and we ran our prototypes by Asian consumers, and we adapted all the nuances while keeping consistency with our global design language. Now, we move to the next slide, Adam, please. This is 101 of product management, to always be user-centered. to design and build with the consumer in mind, to know them, to truly understand them, to know their pain points and needs and incorporate them into the product development process through user testing, research, surveys, and other methods. This is known to all of us, but is this really enough? Well, no. Move to the next slide. What often gets disregarded is the ecosystem our products need to launch and thrive. We had nailed the user centricity part, but we had overseen the complexities of the local ecosystems. So to continue with my story, the success of our product was heavily dependent on having the right imagery to support it. The people in these images would need to reflect their local society. The problem to solve now wasn't how do we help inspire and guide our consumers through their outfit shopping experience, but rather how do we get the content we need for this experience? And this is where ecosystem design thinking comes in. So see, in product management, there's a great deal of emphasis on your users, on making sure we solve problems for them. And while we all have a bunch of noisy stakeholders, thumping on our door every day, asking us for new features, we rarely prioritize the work that doesn't have a direct consumer impact. Why is that so? Well, it probably sounds better to say that we made 10 million in sales than to say that we saved 10 hours a week of our stakeholder team. So for our outfit shopping experience to be successful, we needed an ecosystem, a workflow with processes where the local markets could create and moderate locally relevant content. We needed our stakeholder buy-in to take up this effort, because it might sound like a small thing to create some images of people wearing outfits, but trust me, organizing photo shoots can be a real headache. So it becomes crucial to develop products that are not only user-centered, but that are ecosystem-centered. Products that are brought to life with the stakeholders who need to launch and maintain these experiences in mind. So after spending countless hours with our stakeholders, we got a thorough understanding of their tasks, their priorities, their pain points, and developed an experience to delight both our consumers and our internal partners. We settled on a flexible solution that could be powered by different types of content. So the regions that had more resources and the ability to run local photo shoots would upload the curated content, while the regions with less budget could rely on an automated solution that would use global content. So let's not forget that for a flexible solution like the one we arrived to, we'd also need a flexible success framework, because the different content would have different efforts involved, and it would have a different impact, so you cannot measure them in the same manner. This needs to be reflected on our benchmarks when we compare the experiences and consider how the product should evolve. So to sum it all up, through user-centered design and thinking about our stakeholder ecosystem, we successfully addressed the challenges of creating a scalable global outfit shopping experience that performed well locally. I really hope that these tips will help you take user centricity to the next level, developing products that adapt to different markets and different stakeholder needs. And I'll hand it back to Adam.
Thanks so much, and really interesting to hear how those ideas apply to a specific business case. We're going to hand over to Jana now. Jana's going to be talking a little bit about flexibility in the role of scaling global products without building bespoke solutions for everything. So over to you, Jana.
Hi, thanks, Adam. Can we go to the slide? All right, yeah, so this is Jana. I'm the senior product manager at Procore. What we do is we build software for the construction industry around the world. So what I want to talk about today is one of the reasons product can be performing better in different markets is maybe the processes are different. And this is actually a very common use case. So let's talk about it a little bit. Alba gave a great example of research that will help you build a solution that works. And we should all be following a framework like that. Imagine for a second that your research actually uncovered that the solution is generally okay, like they are compatible across these markets, but variations are important. Like there are make or break customizations that are needed, but their general solution is generally viable. So in some verticals, like insurance, construction, education is a big one, processes differ across regions significantly. And it doesn't mean that the content itself is different or the tools are different. If you imagine education, algebra is the same across the world, a calculator is recognized across the world. So we're not necessarily saying that your solution needs to change, but there's going to be some differences based on preferences. And construction example, for instance, is project management in construction is generally the same, but compliance changes significantly across different countries. So you have to do your project management slightly differently, not completely differently, but slightly differently. But sometimes it's enough for people to be able to say, without these variations, I can't really do my work within this application. Actually, Ini talked about how to widely think about localization. So we're not just talking about changing the language, but we're also talking about the laws, perceptions, structures, institutions across these countries. If you go to the next slide, we can talk about what can we do about it. So when we say make your solution flexible, we don't mean individual and bespoke solutions, obviously, because we can't scale that. Otherwise, you're just a custom code shop for every client that you're selling, right? What we want to do is add scalable customization to your tools, and to make sure that it's part of your infrastructure and it has components that can be reused. So a good example for this is statuses, like I'm showing on the side in here. Almost a lot of tools, especially SaaS tools, use statuses, and they're very key because they're key indicator of a process and the progress made in that process. A lot of different tools can use that, but at the same time, you can't just translate it. Like you can't be like, I have an Canadian localized version, or I have version from Ghana or South Africa. You can't say that you're using these different versions specifically. It has to be custom to what the process is, but also what the compliance requires, what your local specific regional process actually requires. So why don't you then provide a flexible solution to set statuses for the customers so they can do it themselves? At the same time, though, you need to make it scalable, because you can't have every part of your tool do their own customization, because they will be making different decisions around how to customize these tools. One example I can give is, for instance, in what we use in our tool, and many others will too, you probably have some forms in your application, right? And these forms have fields. And many times people will come to you and say, well, my form is a little different. I would like it to include some more information, but the rest is fine. So what you can do is have a global solution that we have, for example, called custom fields. And you can build individual custom fields and reuse them in different parts of your application. So your tools individually don't need to build one. And it's a scalable solution from both a user experience point of view and also an engineering point of view. So you can make it flexible in that way. Let's go to the next slide. There are some tips for success, obviously. So first of all, you don't want to customize everything. Because that will be a UX nightmare, right? Because everything is just changeable. You want to provide some consistent experience. So what do you pick first? You need to prioritize for most impact. And here is the kind of research Albert talked about comes very handy, because you can say, okay, what part of it do people need prioritizing and customizing? Which should I do first? And then you wait, and then you do research, and then wait, and essentially iterate on this idea. Doing your research is very important to know if the features are necessarily a solution or not. Maybe you do need a different feature, or maybe this is just a localization issue. How uniform are the needs? You need to make sure you cover the ground around that. And you build a unified and consistent experience. So it looks the same, it feels the same. It's not a disjointed experience across the board there in your app and in your web application as well. I hope this was useful, and we can talk more about how specific to implement it in your use cases at questions. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you so much. Our final talk today, I do have a couple of questions for David afterwards, but our final 5-minute talk is by James. James is going to be talking a little bit about testing. He is our senior CS manager. He works with our very biggest accounts, so really huge software companies, and he works to deliver their testing framework. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Adam, and awesome to join you all here. Loved hearing everyone's take on this topic. Yeah, as Adam said, as part of my role, I have the privilege of working with some of the largest tech companies in the world and supporting some of the most advanced product teams with localization and internationalization testing and UX research. And I'm going to say I thought Ini's framework was really cool, and I'd like to build on it a little bit, if I may. So I wanted to talk about naturally software testing and research, and share some advice which could help you develop your software testing competency as a business and support you in understanding why your product may be performing better in some markets than others. So I have 3 really brief pieces of advice based on how clients of ours understand their globalized user base. The first tip I wanted to give is a best practice we've evolved at GAT when we review live products looking for issues. So Innie spoke a lot about, or touched on illnesses, and for many of these, the symptoms, can look very similar: depressed signups, poor engagement, reduced NPS, reduced turnover potentially. And these as general symptoms can refer to some of the issues that Innie also mentioned, whether that's a competition or markets issue, a product or functionality issue. A solution to this is to test the full ecosystem in a slightly different way that Adi mentioned. But what I mean is, in order to gain a holistic understanding of any symptoms, evaluate multiple market factors, test your target market's localized product, test your successful markets, maybe plural localized products, and importantly, benchmark test in market against leading competitors. And the reason we recommend this for live products is it gives you a 360-degree insight into the reasons maybe commercial performance may be better in one market than others. And I believe it provides a crucial pathway to certainty that the quality of your app is as expected, and i.e. there's nothing which is either a functional error or which something tells a user that the product hasn't been made with them in mind. And also on the competitive benchmarking piece, surfaces crucial intel on your competitive landscape. We touched on that as well in the earlier comments. Importantly, I'd add, just from a local perspective as well, getting that competitive intel from a local perspective. So number one, test your full ecosystem. And that brings me to my second point, which is to think about the pacing for your testing and UX research. Focusing firstly on UX research pacing. This is often done very slowly, and it's difficult to keep speed with now fast-paced software development life cycles and today's rate of innovation demands. Things like focus groups and surveys can take a long time to collect information for. That's worth it because UX is one of the most critical things to get right, of course. But while it may be fine for a single domestic market, I'll say it's really too slow and too expensive to start when you start talking about tens of differentiated geographies, each with different cultural attitudes and performance. So we've honed that it's possible to do UX research quicker. And we do something we call pulse checks with a few of our major clients. Pulse checks being rapid response, unmoderated interviews in market, where we'll poll representative groups of a user base and typically provide insights within a 1-week turnaround. Really, really powerful, rapid insights that may be a quick UX health check, maybe usability feedback, maybe prototype design feedback, maybe cultural perceptions. So UX research faster, first part of that piece. And then conversely, I'll say, and secondly, it's also true that localization testing, in our opinion, can happen too quickly sometimes. Localization professionals obviously focused on getting products out the door on releases and the fast-paced turnaround that this requires, and sometimes may miss the opportunity of taking account of that broader picture, which is why I talked about that complete ecosystem in my first point, taking into account both quality and value frameworks in full review. So number two, get the pacing of your research and testing right. And then finally, for me, you localization experts are awesome, and I find it fascinating how you think about and how you manage complex language and cultural nuances to ensure product performance. But I wanted to fly a flag for what I'm going to call boring issues, but I'll caveat that as I come through to them, because they're not all boring, given some of what we've heard today. But flying the flag for some of the boring reasons why products might not work for local users, and share some examples. Firstly, think about data consumption. One of our clients, the BBC, thinks a lot about the price of data in different countries. In countries where data is more expensive, users definitely take measures to limit the amount of data their devices use. So engagement with data-thirsty products experiences really suffers. So keep in mind data consumption. It's an important way to think about how different kinds of users will engage with your product. Secondly, on this point, think about device usage. Some of the most popular kinds of internationalization investigations we undertake here at GAT are with non-Western devices, if I can call them that. Android experiences are much more varied than iOS experiences because of the different device landscape that exists. Trami devices, for example, used in China, Southeast Asia, parts of Africa, are always one of the prime suspects for what we think of as compatibility issues. So if developing back home with Samsung and Pixel devices for Android references, don't forget about the Android product experiences can sometimes be considerably different for other users around the world. And my last point, no longer boring, but my last point is your checkout experience. Somewhere I will definitely also reiterate and draw attention to, because it's always a reservoir of issues in our perspective, from our perspective, is that international checkout experience. It's where we do most of our high ROI testing, because that checkout flow is often the most crucial part of software, of the experience. So both ensuring you're supporting and testing different kinds of payment options that local users need and want, and also ensuring and testing those payment flows and integrations are working end to end. So third, don't neglect the boring stuff. And as a roundup from my side, test the full ecosystem, get the pacing of testing and research right, and don't overlook the boring reasons. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you so much. I once read, and I can't remember who the commentator was, but he was a VC type, and they were saying that one of the main heuristics for whether to invest in a company was if it was boring, because the more boring, they argued, the company was, the more likely it was to be profitable. If it was boring and complex, that's a winning company. If it was flashy and solving an easy problem, then you've got to be a really, really good company to do that profitably, because there's going to be a lot of people trying to do it. So anytime somebody brings up boring things, I think that we're onto a commercial winner here. Thank you. Okay, so finally, it's a pleasure to introduce David. David is an enterprise solutions architect at Phrase. Phrase is the leading TMS system for enterprise businesses. David, welcome, first of all. It's great to finally get to hear your voice, the final person on our panel.
I love that my lead-in was the boring conversation. Thank you, Adam, for that. I'm going to remember that next time.
Well, Phrase must be an excellent business, because it's competing in a very interesting field, which is the requirements of localizing a business. I wanted to start with this question of whether you think that the question we've tackled today is a common issue, and how common it is. In your what is the kind of, I guess, the normal level of, like, or how often do businesses not know why one market is doing better than another?
I think it's an extraordinarily common issue. I mean, anyone who is trying to break into a new market is going to have some level of not understanding the performance that they're seeing. Is it good? Is it bad? What have you? As we heard today, there are so many issues that go into the potential performance of a product, whether it's a digital product, whether it's a traditional physical a good that's being purchased. You have those personality traits on the ground with local pop culture, with legislative concerns, how language is being used and presented on a daily basis inside that market. So there are a lot of factors that go into success or failure, and doing that level of research that you need. Obviously it's important to do that, and prioritizing answering those questions early is what does success need to look like here. One, for us as a business, what are my objectives, and how do I adjust those different levers to be successful? It's very, very important.
And given everything you've heard today, so we've heard the same problem from a range of different perspectives. So I guess based on the previous talks, what can an individual do if they can perceive a gap in performance between different markets? What would be the course of action that you would take as a product manager or localization professional to change that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to measure. Data is really important to telling any story and being influential in correcting a course if there is a particular problem. Our platform, we see this a lot where we need to have the data around the localization effort. How long is it taking to translate content? What are the quality issues that are being reported? In language specifically is what we deal with. But then being able to take that data and show it to other people is something that we make very easy. But then combine that data with other metrics. So the localization data and associating that with the revenue or the customer satisfaction or help desk issues. We have a spike in help desk issues commensurate with problems in language issues. So getting that data first and foremost to be able to craft that story and understanding how to put that into language that your business understands and respects. What are the key drivers and motivations for getting into that market? How is success being measured? And can we take this data that we have from our localization efforts and start to craft a discussion of, okay, well, maybe we don't have localization quite right. And if we make some adjustments here, we can see improvements in that revenue capture, in that customer satisfaction score, in our market share capture.
And you've already started to answer this, but my final question is also about internal argumentation. So how would you make the argument that a market needs special attention? So needs more investment or needs deeper levels of change in order to reach consumers and perform well?
I think it starts with the goals for that market. What is everyone? If you've got a product, you've got a sales quota, right? It's what is that? How are we, reaching that number? And are we or are we not? So if we're not meeting our objectives, our revenue objectives, or our market penetration objectives, there's something going on, and it needs to be investigated. And that can lead us to a whole host of discussions around cultural impact, legal situations, how language is being used and presented to our consumers.
Fantastic. So it is a pleasure now to open up those questions to the panel as well. So I have a couple of notices to very quickly run through, and then I can get this slideshow off the screen in front of you. First thing to say is that the next webinar is now open. It is happening on, I've not got the date there, but it is happening in a month in May. It'll be the same time as it is right now, whatever time zone you're in. That is all about using Gen AI in global products. So we've got speakers who are adapting and localizing a generative AI product themselves. And we've got people who, in a more kind of common garden variety, are starting to use generative AI in their translation and their localization processes. If that is you, if you're worried about quality, then you should get along down to our next webinar happening a month from now. And we've got some very exciting speakers lined up there. The second thing, I am watching our subscribers number on my podcast with sweat on my forehead. I would love for you to subscribe. There are some amazing speakers lined up. We've got Marcus Smiley, who is in financial services products at Microsoft, is the next episode to be released. That will be released tomorrow. So do subscribe now and listen to the tomorrow's episode on your commute and see whether you like it. It's going to be a fantastic podcast as we go forward. And then we have a couple of offers. So we are going to run a free localization assessment of your chosen markets. We'll go out and we will find localization bugs just to give you a sense of how the global app testing product works. This is something we do take on cost for, so we can't offer it to everybody. So please do have a go. And you can launch a localization test from our platform and get started like that. If you have any questions about what James said, incidentally, do just pop us a line. Phrase offering something slightly similar. They will do an audit of your localization process, that is, to identify whether there's places you can improve. So do scan that QR code. Incidentally, my colleague Kate is putting these links in the chat. So if you're not fast with the phone, then you'll still be able to click, don't worry. And with that, I think that's all of our notices, and we can align, and I can stop sharing my screen now. So I want to start by asking the rest of the panelists the same question that I finished asking David, which was basically about identifying whether a specific market needs special attention, higher levels of investment. We heard, I think, a really interesting diagnosis about some markets using global content versus some markets using homegrown content from Alba based on business incentives. I'd love to hear people just diagnose, what do you do if you think a market needs special attention? Would anybody like to volunteer to come in on that one?
Yeah,
Go on,
so
Eddie.
I think
Nicely
James?
volunteered, Eddie.
Sorry, can I go, James?
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Eddie.
No, so I think David is spot on. I think you can argue with data. Data is basically the lifeline, or like the lifeblood of product management. And essentially, when CEOs or investors or managers of companies are looking to the return on their investments, they're going to be wondering why we're targeting one segment versus another. And so I think when you have the information and you've done the research and you've done your opportunity assessment to see that one market needs more of attention and the return on investment, because engineering resources are so expensive if you're building like software product. I think when you have that data to be able to back the case that you're making, that becomes something that you're able to influence with and lead with. So I would say when making a case on identifying what markets you should double down in, you definitely need to come and back that with data and ensure that whatever output you get, outcome you get, is going to be essentially a return on investment of the efforts that you're making in that market.
Fantastic. Thank you, Innie. And James, did you try to come in on that one?
I was going to add some comments if no one else was, but keen to allow others to go first. I will also reiterate kind of the importance of data and analytics and metrics that might drive that decision making internally. How is one market compared to other based on the data you're tracking in the back end of your product is a crucial way of identifying how one market needs more attention than another. And also what I'd say is if you have competitive analysis in certain markets, that can sometimes influence whether your product should be performing better in one market or another. Not necessarily because you are a like-for-like copy of another competitor, but actually there's a proven ground out there, and actually it's something we should be paying attention to and trying to adapt our product towards to ensure similar success. So that was a couple of thoughts from us.
Alba, final answer on this question.
Yeah, just to add on all of this, I'd say, what I was mentioning about being flexible with your success framework as well. I think the data, never lies, but it needs to be considered within its context. So you shouldn't be, analyzing the data in isolation and be comparing, a market in the West against a market in the East, but also the whole context around it and understanding, in the East, do we have, less market penetration because competitors are stronger, or is there a different behavior happening on there that can influence the success that we can be seeing there?
Fantastic. I'd love to come to this kind of question then. If we've got data, then we need metrics. One person has written in the form when they decided to come to this webinar, they wrote, I'm specifically interested in KPIs, primarily external KPIs, and how to connect them to internal KPIs if needed. In other words, what is an effective way to measure localization success as directly as possible? That's a extremely difficult question. Is there anybody who can start to give an answer on how you can measure localization success and what you should be setting targets and metrics against? David, over to you.
To the same metrics that you are going to have to determine whether your business is successful or not. Now, if you want to have KPIs against localization's impact against that, what you're really doing is trying to create correlation between localization effort and whatever else you're measuring, whether it's customer sat, whether it's revenue attainment, whether it's market segment growth. being able to correlate that and say, okay, we've just entered market X and we have grown revenue by Y amount. Okay, let's take a look at the localization effort. What are we measuring on the localization side? Is that a quality assessment? Is that turnaround time? Is that just pure spend? Is that number of words translated, to be really crass about it? And say, yes, we did these things positively on the localization side. We're seeing that impact over here on our general business KPIs and try and draw that correlation.
Jana, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so what I was going to say, that's a great point. But one of the things to remember is some of our success criteria might need to be different depending on what kind of global audience we have. One very, again, crude example is like if we're measuring how much someone writes, we might have more verbal cultures, or we might have some languages that are more succinct or not comfortable with writing a lot, whereas some cultures might be very thorough. So if we have a form structure, a completion of a form as a metric might work very well for some cultures, but not work super well for other cultures. But it's very hard to do. Everything metrics is super hard, right? But just something to keep at the back of mind to say, what do we define as successful in this country? Should it also be defined as what's successful? Or if the metric is 20% here, should it be 20% in this other area as well? Just something to think about.
And I mean, that was a rhetorical question, but if I'm going to be really unfair, does anybody want to actually answer it? So given, because it matches the question I've got written down here, if we can't expect all markets to behave the same, and presumably we can't for all kinds of reasons, how do you then set your commercial or product performance expectations in a given market? Are there ways that you can gauge how successful your product should be as you start to kind of set out your plans for activity? Jana.
If I understand this correctly, Adam, so one thing that I would look at is completion metrics of certain tasks. So what I mean by this is that like you are trying to differentiate between pure interest, like someone who has some incentive or interest to do something, but can't do it for some reason. And you might not know the why, or the qualitative research really helps. But if you have a completion metric, like an end-to-end, if you have a cart, for instance, the carts are very famous, the shopping carts. Like checkout experiences are very famous in terms of funnel like that. But in your other parts of the experience, you could say, well, these people are not finishing it, but they're from Australia. What's happening in Australia where these people are not generally finishing? I think that could be a specific metric that you can measure with definitely different tools and put it in front of you.
I've got another question here. Oh, sorry, David, I didn't see you'd put up your hand.
I was gonna say, genre it's a great diagnostic metric. Is that shopping cart abandonment? That idea of the numbers are bending about, and they're pretty consistent. That 40% of people consistently say they will not buy if they can't have a purchase experience in their preferred language, and that gets us to markets aren't monoliths, and you're going to maybe have multiple languages. Are you servicing the right mix of languages to get the maximum out of that particular market?
I would love to for the next question, I'd love to just double click about the kind of on the difference in approaches that we should think about taking if the reasons that we think we're doing differently in one market versus another were two quite different reasons in each framework, to just kind of pull those out a bit. So for example, can any of the panel give an example of what an appropriate course of action might be if you found that a really dominant local competitor was the reason that your product wasn't performing so well, versus if it was something that was more marketing kind of based, like the individual consumers didn't feel like the communication and the product reflected them? Can you give an example of what an appropriate response might be and how that might be different for different categories?
Speculatively, certainly.
Sure.
It's if you coming up against a tough competitor in that market, what is your expected market share? How are you beating them potentially in your home market or in other successful markets? And maybe you need to reevaluate this market and say, all right, well, they've got a lock on it. They've been in here for 10 years and it's well established, but let's find a niche. let's understand our audience a little more specifically and maybe have to cater to them. So that becomes a product development pipeline question, is what are we going to do to really service that niche to grow in that particular market that we've decided we want to be in.
Innie, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, basically what David said was kind of similar to what I was going to say, but essentially not all markets are equal. Every market has its own distinct return on investment. And so if, say, in our larger markets, the issue was competition, we can then start to assess how, like, what is our niche? What is our moat? How can we actually brand our products in a way that's defensible in that market? So say, for example, like I can use an example of eBay. eBay is an e-commerce platform, and also Amazon is an e-commerce platform. Both have totally different moats. So eBay cannot like beat Amazon when it comes to like shipping times, because we don't own our own infrastructure. We don't sell our own products directly. We are just connecting sellers to buyers across the world. And so if eBay looked at Amazon and says, I want to compete with Amazon and Prime shipping, we're not organized and structured to do that. However, our niche, where we are doubling down on, are really enthusiast buyers, so who are collectors, people who love the auctions format of purchasing. So we're really looking at what is our own niche in this market where we have other dominant players, and figuring out how to essentially cater to that niche. And so these are sort of ways that you can begin to adapt your product to specific markets. And then if it's you have to do prioritization. If one market has like larger competition, another market is just a marketing dollars that need to be spent in order to grow your product there, you need to sort of do prioritization of what markets should I be targeting at this point in time.
James, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sure. So you may suspect, you may have a hypothesis that your competitors are the reason why perhaps your market performance is under par in a certain part of the world. But why is that? I guess is what I would double down on and double click on. There's an interesting place to start potentially by assessing core flows within your product, comparing your core flows with a competitor's core flows. And there's companies out there that have communities of people around the world, Gap being one of them, that can allow you to compare and contrast your experiences against someone else's and identify some interesting nuances or maybe weaknesses compared to others that may be a drawback in performing that. We had an interesting case where we did some competitive analysis for a big tech company, and this was in Brazil specifically, and they were looking at a communications platform product that they supported, and there was an interesting piece of feedback from a tester in markets suggesting that the weakness or where this product fell short was on the ability to customize the alert notification sounds in their market compared to the competitors that allow this. And that was important to them because in that market in Brazil, people receive tons of spam calls, tons of spam notifications, and they kind of wanted to filter that out of their world if they could to. And this product didn't offer that, their competitors did. That was where there was a slight shortfall. So understand the reason why specifically your competitors are beating you. Check out your core flows is a good place to start.
So I've got one of the entry form questions is related, I guess, to one of these reasons your product might be doing, or one of the challenges you could face in a specific market. This person asks, how can a company establish a strong presence in a country where their operations are not physically situated? So I wonder if anybody on the panel has had a challenge that has felt like it's related to head office and the business being very far away from a market that you're trying to make progress in, and whether anybody could speak to kind of ways that you might have addressed that, or advice that you would give to this individual who's trying to launch somewhere that clearly they are not. No worries. I can't tempt anyone out on that question. That's fine. Final question.
I would say one quick point on that, and again, take it with a grain of salt. The perspective is find local people to whom you can listen. Period. I mean, there's no substitute for local knowledge. I mean, I don't want to call out hard examples, but there is a certain beverage company that had struggles opening up a British office because they didn't have anyone who'd ever seen Only Fools and Horses. Adam understands that reference. James understands that reference. Everyone else is a blank look. That's why you have local people to be able to answer these kinds of questions. Is, let me find someone who can look at this and go, you're in a lot of trouble if you do this, and it may be perfectly fine in every other market in the world, but here you're going to have trouble. Just find local people.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
I was just
go
going
on.
to add I was going to add to that. It was so again, depending on what stage you are as a company, whether you're like really seasoned and mature, or you're like a growth stage, you could be like, so who do I find and how do I find this person? Even like because of the age that we live in today, even stuff like micro influencers who are using your product and just talking about it on like TikTok, which it could go viral. I think depending on the stage you are in the company, there are ways to target people who are locally based, who can help you sort of market your product. So think about it on that scale.
Fantastic. I think we've got time for one final question before we close the webinar. I'd love to ask a final question just about prioritizing your efforts. We've talked about this subject as though from a kind of troubleshooting perspective, that you should identify the product where there's problems and focus your time there. How do you know where is the best time to actually, or how does the panel actually allocate their time? Because it could be that it's more commercially effective to double down somewhere you're successful than to fix a problem where a market where you perceive there's a problem. So I'd love to just give any closing thoughts on what is the best way to allocate your time as a resource in order to fix these kinds of problems or boost broader success of the product elsewhere.
One quick note I will make, Adam, is to think about short-term versus long-term impact that you're planning. So for instance, if you're entering into a market, but you're looking for success within 3 years, as opposed to like you need to fix something within 6 months, then your prioritization might change a little bit. For instance, you might not be targeting wide adoption right away. Your focus might be on learning. So your prioritization might be, what can I do to learn? And in those cases, for instance, you might listen closely to smaller companies, maybe build things that sound like bespoke to those companies, but what they're actually doing is laying the groundwork for making a larger push within 3 years. So time frame is one thing to think about.
Thank you so much, Shayna. Does anybody else want to come in on that before I close the webinar? We've maybe got time for one more answer. No, in which case we will close the webinar. Thank you, everybody who has joined us today, and thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I've had a whirl of a time, and we will be publishing this episode publicly online in the days that follow. So please do share it with your colleagues and friends, and join us for the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.